All right, we're getting the thumbs up from the team there. So thank you. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. And thank you for taking the time to join us today as we talk about agents. I know that's been on the top of everyone's mind. What are agents? What can we do with them? What does this mean in a Microsoft 365 context? And all of these questions will be answered today. This is part one of a two-webinar series. We've got a lot to get through today. So today we'll be covering the basics about agents in Microsoft 365, what it means for you and your business, what it also means in terms of the broader industry trends, and we'll cover some key considerations around security, risk, and good governance best practices. So today's session will definitely give you a solid groundwork in understanding agents in Microsoft 365. And in part two, we'll get more into the technical details about things you can do to manage them, but more on that later. For now, we've got a lot of content. Let's kick things off and by introducing the team. My name's Timothy, for those who haven't met before, SVP at AvePoint, and also a Microsoft MVP for Microsoft 365 Copilot, based just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Norm, to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Norm Young here from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. I'm a Power Platform Solution Architect at AvePoint, and I'm also a dual MVP in business applications in Microsoft 365. Thanks for taking time out to join us today, and it's a pleasure to be here. Over to you, Jared.
And to round us out, hey, good morning, good afternoon, Jared Matfis. I'm a solutions architect, also at AvePoint on the solution engineering team. I'm not an MVP, but I was a former MVP in Office Apps and Services. But I am a huge Copilot nerd, and I just had a book come out this year on getting started with M365 Copilot, and I just finished writing a book coming out this summer around quick start around Copilot Studio. So yeah, agents are all the rage. I'm happy to dispel some of the myths around them and talk about where you might be able to unlock value. So awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Just an MVP on pause, that's all. So, all right, if we can go to the next slide. Norm, why don't you give us a little bit more background into what our audience can expect from this webinar and what it is and what it isn't?
Well, today we're going to talk about what Microsoft AI agents are across their cloud solutions. We're going to understand the different types that we have inside of the Microsoft Cloud. We want to bring some awareness around some of the business risks that might be associated with agents and give you an overview of what's possible today from a governance perspective with the current technical solutions that are available. And what this webinar isn't is we're not doing an agent in a day. This is not going to be a scare tactic to have you turn everything off inside of your Power Platform and M365 tenant. This is not going to be a deep dive in how to, quantify that ROI on an agent that you might build. And we're not going to pitch the Microsoft-based Copilots against the other vendors. This is solely going to be focused on that. So, Jared, why don't you give us an overview of what agents are?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Norm. So I think it's helpful when you talk about agents, it's also helpful to think about the context of Copilot versus agents. And so, Copilot, as Satya said, Microsoft's gonna be the Copilot company. There's gonna be a Copilot for, every person, whether they're an information worker, whether they are someone that's maybe a frontline worker. And, really the focus is gonna be on having Copilot be this UI for all the various applications and services that'll be delivered via the Microsoft platform. What's slightly different, and Satya says that Copilot's going to be the UI for AI. I think ignoring Copilot for a moment, conversation is the new UI. Copilot is Microsoft's implementation of that. So again, Copilots are really focused on the individual. Agents are interesting because they're focused on business processes, and it's about how do you streamline those processes, inject AI into the workflow, and allow the AI to orchestrate across multiple systems. They could be connected through a Copilot, so you could be conversing and engaging that agent, through the Copilot UI, or they could be operating autonomously, meaning, certain event-driven triggers will have them start to kick off. For example, You might build an agent that goes ahead and engages when a new opportunity is created in CRM. And there's going to be lots of different flavors of these agents. You're going to most likely be building these agents within your own environment. So custom agents tailored to your business processes. There'll be agents that are built by third-party ISVs, it's like Adobe, ServiceNow, SAP. We even at AvePoint are investing in agents for, allowing you to engage with our platform. There will be agents that Microsoft builds and allows you to deploy to your tenant and to customize further. There's going to be the facilitator agent, the project manager agent, the research agent. And then most recently at Build this week, they've talked about integrating these autonomous agents into their core service offerings. Dynamics 365, there's a big article announcement around the MCP protocol and be able to have an MCP servers being accessible through Dynamics 365. So think about that, like orchestrating these virtual employees, if you may, to go complete different business transactions. So there's gonna be a whole gamut of types of agents and within the environment. It's only going to be going faster. So Norm, if you don't mind to skip to the next slide, quick little screenshot. We actually were early on in the agent journey, exposing and sharing some of our allowing you to integrate into our platform. It's helping to simplify some of the workflow. We've received feedback over time that our platform is amazing, but if there's only an easier way to interact with it, agents really, if you think about it, it's a new way to allow users to transact in backend systems. It doesn't really matter what that backend configuration looks like because you can use natural language to have it accomplish what you're looking for. So again, just want to give you a quick little snapshot as to what we're doing from a AvePoint perspective. But getting us back on topic, because again, I tend to tangent slightly, there's a spectrum of agents from a complexity perspective, all the way from simple. And so a simple example of an agent would be a retrieval agent. So if you think about how these AI models work, they've been trained on this huge corpus of data. And when you think about trying to get the answer that you're looking for, right? These large language models are predicting. They're very good at predicting. There should be an agent that'll follow me around to play poker, because then maybe I'd actually win for a change. But these agents are grounded on data, training data. But if you think about your organization, that data is not included in those large language models for good purposes, right? That's great. That means that your security model is working. But you might want to build agents that are grounded in specific data in your environment, such as maybe an HR, benefits agent, something where you could ask it, when's open enrollment, how do I request a leave of absence, and have that tied to a particular SharePoint site or team, etc. Those are very simple to create agents, and very reflects a very simple sort of use case. Going down the spectrum a little bit more are task-based agents. So those allow you to transact in back-end systems. You can have an agent create a new opportunity in CRM. You could have it create a new list item. It allows you to help to automate and streamline repetitive tasks. So again, leveraging conversation as the UI to transact in those back-end systems is another available option for agents. To kick it up another notch are autonomous agents. And so those operate independently. So, for the first two, those are initiated through a user prompt. Hey, can you go ahead and find me out, where's our benefits form? Can you create an opportunity in CRM? These autonomous agents can be triggered based on conditions, an entry in CRM, a Microsoft form submission, a new item created in SharePoint list, just a couple of quick examples. And these can orchestrate across multiple systems, connecting, making, have it go check the inventory level of product, go ahead and create a new purchase order to backfill if needed, to go update a record in SAP, like just et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole spectrum, and the complexity of these agents also, if we can go to the next slide, helps to start to dictate some of the benefits, right? So from a knowledge agent perspective, you get the benefit of asking an agent a very targeted question and getting a very accurate response. The benefit of a task automation agent, right, can repeat the repetitive tasks, multi-step processes, etc. As you start to get into like more of the autonomous agents, you have the ability to orchestrate across workflows. So again, tying your ERP, your CRM, your SharePoint list, all those various data sources through one agent experience. And some of the other intangible other benefits are the personalization, leveraging the reasoning power of a large language model to help to personalize that experience in the company's language, understanding the habits of the users transacting that you're serving, to to ironically deliver a more human experience using AI technology. So those are some of the benefits. The question you might have is, so who's building these things, right? You've got this large organization, but like, who's making these things? So those knowledge agents are relatively simple. Like those do not take a ton of effort to create. There's agents in SharePoint, which are like basically do next to nothing to configure them. There's the agent builder experience, which is also like a step up of not that difficult. When you start getting into task agents, those are a little more complex. You're most likely to have your makers in your organization. Those that are building Power Apps and Power Automate workflows are most likely the targets of your task-based agents. When you get to autonomous, that's when things get kind of interesting, because while Copilot Studio is a low-code application development platform, the reality is autonomous agents are a little bit more complex. They require a little bit more logic and design to pull off. So those are most likely going to be built by IT pros, IT devs, and maybe like your cutting edge, like advanced makers. But for the most part, those are most likely to be built initially by IT. And then your managed agents are going to be a combination of Microsoft building these, ISVs creating them, and then you might do some personalization when it hits your tenant. So just want to share again kind of the spectrum of who's building these things, most likely in your tenant. From a development patterns perspective, there's declarative agents. So you can think about that as you're describing what it's going to do, and configuring the knowledge sources to it. And these agents live in a Cosmos database or flat files in SharePoint. These are designed for really rapid development so that you are able to solve a business problem quickly. The next on the spectrum is Copilot Studio agents. So again, those are going to be built, configured versus actual code. They can be extended into Azure AI Foundry. You can build some very rich, unique solutions, but they leverage the Power Platform connector framework. They are able to leverage the Microsoft graphs. You can connect to various M365 data sources. They do support collaborative development, though there are some limitations to some of that. But again, think these are relatively powerful agents. And then finally, there's pro-code agents. So those will be built by software engineers, data engineers, managed through Azure AI Foundry, leveraging the Azure AI service. Those scale to the power of Azure. They offer more robust logging and telemetry data, but most likely will be built by your professional devs. So just want to share there's a couple patterns for building out these agents. And then finally, I think it might be cool to show you just how easy it is to go ahead and create an agent. And so because that service keeps on moving on, it is a pre-recorded demo because you never know what you're going to get. So if we can move on forward, I'm going to ask this to go ahead and create an agent to share or to respond with AvePoint's products and services. Again, it's very simple sort of Q&A type agent. So I'm leveraging a Copilot to create this agent. So again, I kind of kicked it my first question, create the agent that answers questions about AvePoint's products and services. It's now going to ask me for a name for that agent. I'm going to tell it AvePoint product lookup. It's going to go ahead, and this is done real time. I'm going to ask it to only answer questions about products and services for us, AvePoint, to let it kind of the movie magic catch up. Any guidelines, and so I'm going to ask it to only return back responses for where it's for something that's found from our website, right? So I don't want it to hallucinate and to answer questions about us. I want it to be grounded on the data. I'm now going to give it our AvePoint public website, which is that. It's going to then ask me once it's done configuring if I any more modifications. I could, but for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to say no. And at this point, I've got an agent that's grounded on avepoint.com. It's able to retrieve and return answers from the Bing search index. And now I can ask it, does AvePoint have a product that backs up Microsoft 365? It's going to go ahead and hit that search index, and it's going to return information from our website, hopefully, if it works. It's pre-recorded, so it should work, but we'll see. Movie magic, movie magic. There it is. And it's got a reference to a couple of references to our website, talks about our capabilities, our products. So that didn't take a lot of effort. That's a pretty powerful agent that can return information about our website. So when you think about how easy it is to create these agents, your makers are going to figure this stuff out. So this is probably why we're having this webinar. So Norm, I'll kick it back to you. I'm sorry,
Cool.
Tim, I'll kick it to you. My bad.
No, thanks, Jared. Look, now that we've seen a couple of the things that we can do with agents, right, and how easy it is to set them up, that demo was pretty quick. And you can see how that would be useful if you wanted to empower your team or even yourself with querying certain knowledge repositories or making it very easy to get custom answers to questions or custom actions. Let's spend a couple minutes on the broader business impact this is expected to have. So as you saw from the demo, it's easier than ever now to automate parts of your workflow. And previously, this would have been just in the realm of developers or power users or makers, as Jared called them. But even to do that requires some semblance of IT logic. What's happening now is it's getting easier and easier to simply speak to Copilot and other agents and have it build an agent for you. And this is only going to get easier in the future as these technology frameworks develop. So by giving AI agency, it's now going to be able to increase the number of automatable tasks and workflow that you can create. And it's expected, Gartner research was suggesting that by 2028, AI agents are going to make up 15% of daily work, which is crazy adoption considering that last year there was 0%, right? It feels like ever since January this year, we've been talking about agents nonstop, and I don't think that's going to slow down. And of course, software developers are probably going to be the first group of people living on that bleeding edge of technology to see that impact, but it's not going to take long to trickle into other areas of the organization as well. So really empowering your entire workforce to be able to build and manage automation with natural language that's easy to use. So what's the impact of this? So as we move along to the next slide, Norm. This will have huge impacts in organizations around the world. So Microsoft just recently released their 2025 Work Trend Index report. And one of the first things that they point out is that, previously human intelligence has been one of the most valuable and limited assets in the business for decades. However, thanks to technology like this, businesses can now scale their expertise instantly without hiring more. So what we're going to see is the closing of the gap between workforce resources and organizational intelligence demand, and this shift in intelligence to an on-demand resource like electricities or other utilities, right? Intelligence on tap, like it says here. This is expected to significantly boost productivity and completely redefine how we approach knowledge work, increasing efficiency, but also redefine how we approach our organizational hierarchies. So moving to the next slide, what we're going to see is that traditional org charts are very ripe for disruption here, with traditional hierarchies being replaced by a human agent mix. So you're going to see more fluid, outcome-driven teams, augmented with AI agents and driven by AI, rather than traditional hierarchies. So this kind of new work is expected to lead to faster decision-making, greater agility, and probably end up with more project-based or outcome-based teams, sort of like what you see in movie production, or for those of you who've read Valve's employee handbook and they know they've got the little pods with the desks that you wheel together to work in little pods. We're probably going to see more of this happening throughout the workforce, where teams are assembling for projects, disbanding afterwards, and being augmented by AI agents. And finally, the impact that that's going to have is that if you imagine that every employee is now going to have an army of AI agents at their disposal to augment their individual work, their teamwork, and these individual agents will have their own reasoning, they'll need their own fine-tuning, you'll need to figure out what you're delegating to them, what you're not delegating to them. Essentially, every employee now becomes an agent boss. So it's expected that this shift will help accelerate individuals' careers, right? So you can focus on strategy and creativity rather than the repetitive tasks, as Jared was talking about, right? So they're ripe for automation. And a lot of organizations and leaders are already preparing for this transition, with many of them considering hiring an AI workforce manager or people who specialize in understanding and managing agents across the workforce to optimize this human-agent collaboration that we're expecting to see. So finally, Microsoft is describing this shift as the frontier firm, if we go to the next slide. So this is their way of describing how all of these changes together are describing organizations that are on the leading edge today of this new wave of business transformation, and how additional businesses will continue to get on board with this and become frontier firms themselves. However, this obviously doesn't come without risk. So again, as Norm said, this is not going to be a scare tactic where we're going to talk about all the negative things, but it is important to consider that if you've got now a team of people, or in this case, a team of agents, these agents are now individual endpoints that can act on your behalf. We now have a mix of autonomous decision-making by our agents and real-world consequences from the actions that they take. So while this has a great opportunity to empower us and add a lot of productivity, there's also some risk that needs to be managed to make sure that we're doing this safely and effectively. So if every agent is an endpoint, it could be tricked with prompt injection, it could misinterpret your commands like hallucination, or it could potentially expose data. So if the agent's accessing data that it shouldn't be accessing, there's a risk it could be overexposing or acting on the wrong data. And we're going to deep dive into those risks in just a second. But essentially, this is causing businesses to rethink their approach to AI, rethink their approach to agents, and puts a huge emphasis on governance and security. So Norm, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those interesting things that keeps coming up in the Power Platform space. We want to enable the innovation of a low-code, no-code platform. We want to take advantage of everything that AI is going to offer ourselves and our business users throughout the organization, but we still want to balance that risk associated with it. And so it's finding that right balance that can be a challenge for many organizations. We don't want to turn it all off. We want to enable some of it, but we need to make informed decision making around what works and what's not going to work for the organization. So there's some key considerations that we need to understand when we're trying to assess risk. At the top of the list is data exposure. Copilot and agents are really good at discovering and using obscure data in their responses. And so preventing permissions drift and performing content validation are going to be ongoing risk mitigation activities that we must account for in our governance and in our information lifecycle planning. Also, we have to worry about compliance violations. In most of the traditionally developed, like IT professionally developed applications, there's always oversight and control to ensure that sensitive data is not mishandled. And now with this rise of low-code to no-code tools like the Power Platform, this oversight is not always in place. And that means that some of those essential guardrails and the enforcement of those IT-style controls have been bypassed, and this can lead to violations in legal and regulatory requirements. Agent sprawl is also an issue, but it's not an issue of clutter. Agents increase the risk of surface area by increasing the number of endpoints that can be exploited, or provide misinformation, or increase costs, or increase the risk of compliance violations to that overexposed data. We've all heard about hallucinations and misinformation, and it sounds really basic in concept. Bad data in is going to equal bad data out. But it's not always easy to apply information lifecycle management and content validation at scale. So if we take a closer look at data exposure, one of the things that we often see is that our connections become over-permissioned. And we see this when service accounts, for example, get repurposed across solutions. And the permissions used to fulfill one requirement are not really appropriate for those subsequent requirements, leading to that permissions drift, leading to unintended access to sensitive data. We also have to worry about user impersonation, and more importantly, the improper user impersonation. Now, ideally, the actions performed by our agents are executed in our context and not the maker's context. This way, we want to respect the user's security and data permissions. If we don't do that in our agent builds, it can lead to action execution that would have otherwise been prevented by my user permissions. And when you consider auditing and logging under the maker's credentials, it's almost impossible to find out what activities I may have done. We also have to worry about the data that we're pulling into our agents. So not having filtering or row-level security can cause multiple issues for our agents. Some of those issues include poor performance when you pull in an entire data set, Or you might get incomplete data. You might have a data source like a SharePoint list that can only do pagination and only return certain amounts of rows. And I guess the most important one, the one that is the most scary to all of us, is that those actions we're taking with the wrong information or the wrong data. We often see in the Power Platform, there's this mix of business and non-business or corporate and personal data. And so we leverage something like the Power Platform data loss prevention policies. And these can, isolate and facilitate, those approved connectors and try and prevent those shadow IT ones. And this DLP becomes a crucial guardrail that can help keep our agent makers, the corporate data safe, and reduce shadow IT from proliferating. Now, with compliance, we saw in the demo that Jared provided that agents have this low technical barrier to creation, meaning that our makers in our organizations can create solutions without having to work with IT. And this can be a problem for compliance and regulatory requirements when an agent wasn't created with that same scrutiny that would have been applied to an IT-built solution, where those compliance and those regulatory controls would have been at the forefront. And so we have to be worried about our makers handling regulatory data without the proper controls. God forbid that there was a data breach. And if that data was exposed, the organization could face financial penalties, legal actions, reputational damage, and more. We also see in a lot of our agents that we will request information from our users. This prompting of user input is a common action, and not every business maker is going to know that they need to include a consent message in there. But the issue here is less about the maker knowing to do that, but more about us as the IT governance team being able to identify when an agent or any other Power Platform solution needs to be treated with the same standards and the same IT professional rigor when it comes down to mitigating risk and maintaining those compliance controls. And the failure to log and audit that access. Auditing is never going to be top of mind for most makers. And adding logging into the agent build process is going to be difficult for most makers without IT assistance. So again, knowing that an agent needs auditing and logging will likely fall on IT to inform the maker to help them guide through that process. Now, cost containment is always a tricky conversation. And this might seem straightforward, but it's not. It's going to be, it depends in most cases. There are 3 types of licensing options currently available for Copilot Studio agents. If we start at the bottom of the screenshot that we see from Microsoft, it's the easiest one to understand. It's the Microsoft 365 Copilot license that a lot of us are using inside of Teams, Word, Outlook, and so on. This allows us to create agents, and we can extend the functionality of those agents into the Microsoft 365 Copilot applications like Teams, SharePoint, Copilot Chat. And so this license in this ideal scenario is when you want your agents to leverage internal data like SharePoint data, and you would integrate that agent into something like Teams or Copilot Chat. The next option is called a message pack. And now these are prepaid subscriptions that provide a fixed number of messages per month. And message packs are ideal for known, consistent, and predictable message interactions each month. This is a great scenario to help understand budgeting and plan for budgeting. And it allows for that agent interaction beyond M365 into something like a public website. The final option, the one that gets a little more complicated, is the pay-as-you-go option that is tied to an Azure subscription. Now, this one can be complicated based on how the agent is designed, how it might respond to a request, but it's also very misleading when it says 1 penny per message. But as we'll get Jared to explain later, it can be very complicated. Despite the complexity, it's also a really good choice for those situations where you might have a new agent and you don't understand what the steady state of message volume will be. Or maybe your agent's only going to be used seasonally, like maybe 1 month out of the year. And so having a message pack or other types of licenses doesn't make sense. sometimes pay-as-you-go is a cheaper choice. Now, I've mentioned that the pay-as-you-go option can be complicated. Jared, can you help break down some of the complexities that we need to understand with our agents, how they might have been designed and how they respond that would affect pay-as-you-go?
Yeah, with Microsoft licensing, there's no easy. So just going to make that statement. It's never easy. And with these agents, what you'll want to do is start to map out what you believe is going to be the typical conversation flow. That initial greeting of an agent, that will consume a message. Asking a question will, incur a message. Having it go perform a generative answer, meaning that if someone says, hey, I want you to go ahead and I want to know when our benefits, when's open enrollment start. If you have it go provide a generative answer, that actually counts as like two messages. If there's a follow-up, that's another message. If you expand if you ask it for a more open-ended question that's grounded on the full tenant data, that's more messages. And if you thank the agent, that's another message. So this is, again, representative. There's a lot of math that you'll have to do when you start to figure out like what's the typical happy path and what's maybe the edge cases where a person might be engaging back and forth with that agent a couple of times, and then think about how many individuals might be using that agent in a day, how many times across your organization, what percentage would, like something that's scoped for, department level or organization level, like those are going to have higher numbers. And even then, you're probably going to still get it wrong. But having some sort of initial sort of back the napkin map, you'll want to go ahead and step through the message counts to try to figure out, again, like what it potentially could cost, and then learn from it as your users start to interact with it. And there's a couple of tips and tricks. I actually put it in my book around ways to maybe reduce the amount of generative answers based on the responses, based on the interactions that your users have, to try to make these a little bit more cost optimal. So figure just touch like this is something you'll probably want to do on an agent by agent basis. And then if we think about the risks that Norm was talking about, I feel like I'm aging myself a little bit, but these agents feel a little bit like Access databases, only scarier. Um, I think I used to work in a large aerospace and defense firm, and we used to have the interns come in for the summertime. They'd build these amazing Access databases, and then they leave, and kind of IT is stuck having to manage these. This is going to be interesting because these agents might be duplicative. You might have agents performing the same thing as maybe like your HR team has an agent for benefits, and maybe one of your pesky engineers goes, I don't like that one. I'm going to make my own sort of HR benefits agent and point at that same document library. You might have people create some agents and then peace out and go off and do other things. And maybe there's no owner for that agent and people start to use it. There might be agents that are created without security reviews. There's a question in the chat around, is there a simple way to understand the data that an agent has at its disposal? And the answer is there's no simple way of doing that, honestly. Like, I think when you think about building agents in your organization, relying on and identifying and tagging sensitive information, securing the access to that, including reviews of the connectors being used, having periodic audits, like that's all part of this. I mean, these are simple to create, but ultimately these are IT solutions that are supporting users in your organization to solve business problems. Our platform does make it easy for you to identify where you might have that sensitive data, where it might be overexposed. But there's definitely going to be a little bit of back and forth between the maker community, as Norm mentioned, and your IT team to really make this work well. And last call out too is, a lot of organizations spend money on their brand, the voice of the organization, the experience of it. And as you enable these agents to be able to support your users, having different personalities, different mini brands, that creates kind of a disjointed experience. And so, that's going to look like have to be part of that overall governance plan, is to help ensure people use a consistent brand, consistent feel. So it's a consistent experience in your organization. The other question for agent developers, they need, there's actually, if you are developing and testing there, that does not incur cost. It's when you publish that agent out to a channel, Microsoft Teams, within an external website, within applications, when you start to incur cost. But you can start to leverage and build within Copilot Studio without incurring those costs. Faye, that was your question. All right. And then one last risk that we're going to talk about, Norm, if you don't mind advancing slightly. Misinformation examples. And this is going to be it's a mix of the fun of working with Gen AI and the fun of working with enterprise data. So there's going to be chances where your agent pulls from an outdated SharePoint site. That does happen. There's a lot of reorganization of SharePoint content. Maybe it's an older file, wasn't archived. There's going to be examples where it doesn't have an answer, so you have to worry about, how does that experience, how do you configure that experience so people don't lose faith in these agents? There's going to be some bad prompting by users, and you're going to figure out how do you triage against that. And this last one isn't like maybe not, but like there's going to be times where connectors are not configured at the right application. The classic example, as someone that's lived in IT for a very long time, you might forget to flip it from pointing at the UAT instance of an system then to the prod instance. That happens like as it's going through the ALM pipeline. So again, just some fun examples of things that might happen and most likely will happen, especially in the early days of working and building out agents. Um, from a quick sort of summary of the things, so we talked about data exposure, we talked about compliance violations, and I think the theme or a mindset that might be helpful to adopt when you're thinking about agents in your organization, and this might sound weird, think of agents as people. What are the guardrails you want to put in place for people? The access to data that they might have, how they might handle sensitive information, the cost that they might incur for doing things incorrectly, the fact that they might be kind of creating these little opportunities all throughout your environment or pointing to data sources that are not relevant or current. That's just a kind of a nice summary of what could potentially and most likely will happen without planning for governance, which is a perfect handoff to Mr. Norm to talk about what do we do about these risks.
Yeah, indeed. So what does good governance look like for Copilot Studio? Uh, and achieving good governance, starts with a complete visibility into all of those agents within the tenant. And this will allow us to assess the positive business outcomes that Copilot Studio is making, and also identify those potential areas of concern. But we also need to understand the why behind each agent. We need to understand the business value. We need to understand the potential impact if there was a service interruption. Power Platform promises business-led innovation without IT bottlenecks. But to realize this safely, we have to implement the right guardrails to protect company data while empowering our makers to add value through those agents. And so some of the challenges that we're seeing with our customer base is around data security, the accidental exposure to sensitive data, that commingling of business data and non-business data, ensuring that authentication is correct, either at getting to the agent's making its connections to the underlying data sources, and when required, where that logging and auditing needs to happen for the different agent interactions that we're having. We also know that with most maker-based solutions, it's about the outcome and less about the process or the style in which it's built. So things like application lifecycle management aren't really forefront for our makers. So things like validating ownership to prevent ownership risks may not be on the forefront when someone builds an agent out in a business unit. Having these traditional ALM movements, those application lifecycle movements from a dev to a QA to a production environment may not exist. They may not always be required either. It depends. Some agents, some applications are clearly more important than others. And the ones that are most important that can have that big business impact, they need to be treated differently. We also have to understand what's gone inactive, what's stale. When Tim was talking about every agent as an endpoint, it's about reducing risk of that exposure area. Cost management is one that we were just talking about, and we saw those different options for licensing of agents, but we want to make sure that cost optimization with The licensing model you choose for the agents is addressed. The connector usage, so we have something called the premium connectors in the Power Platform, making sure that we're not using those for the wrong reasons or for the wrong ways, and making sure that we're not reproducing functionality that exists with that danger of getting different results and making bad decisions based on those different results. So one of the things that we need to start to do when we're doing our governance planning is to start to answer some of these questions. And when you answer them, they can help inform what your plan is going to look like. So who can create agents? Some organizations will leave this open by default. Others will limit it to a select group of individuals or teams, and others will want to implement like a formal request and fulfillment process. The decisions you make here will tie back to settings inside of the Power Platform Admin Center that can be adjusted to match those requirements. We also learned earlier that there's different types of agents with different levels of functionality and risk. And so, a knowledge-based agent based on like that SharePoint site with good content lifecycle management will probably be a safe choice for most organizations. But when you contrast this to like those autonomous agents that Jared was talking about, those getting created outside of IT and they execute actions that can have consequences to the business, this is something that most organizations may not feel that comfortable with. Most Copilot Studio agents will be surfaced in something like Teams or that Copilot chat in M365. And these internal contact points, they're mostly safe, but agents can also be published to public websites. And so this represents a real risk of data exfiltration that should be under additional levels of IT and InfoSec scrutiny. And before building in agents, many organizations will want to pause and confirm that they are not duplicating functionality of an existing solution. Some organizations will have service catalogs, and these will be great ways to validate core services, but not all business users will know about this and want to avoid duplication. This is mostly a process decision, but in the case of apps and flows, we can use governance automation to identify these popular solutions and trigger appropriate actions to follow. And in the not too distant future, we'll see the same type of support coming to Copilot Studio agents. And finally, the big question is, how can we prevent introducing unnecessary risk to the organization from agents? And this comes in many forms. And it's probably your governance plan that you established today and the plan that you will mature tomorrow as this new control functionality comes available to agents. This is how we're going to manage our agent creation through your business makers and your traditional IT developers. Administration and management and the governance controls that we're seeing in Copilot Studio, they have not caught up to the expectations that most organizations are looking for before they deploy Copilot Studio at scale. So this means that in our current state, there's no silver bullet. There's no one solution that will meet our governance needs. So we're going to need a combination of tools for the short term to manage Copilot Studio. That'll probably come in the form of what we're seeing on the screen right now, the Power Platform Admin Center, or PPAC. Could also include things like managed environments, if that makes sense for the organization. Some may still have to rely on the COE Starter Kit open source package. Or finally, some organizations will use something as powerful as AvePoint's Control Suite. So in the absence of Copilot Studio agent specific controls, what can we do today? What should we be doing today to lay the groundwork for good governance? Well, we will have to focus on a sound environment strategy that reflects the organization's structure and how they do their business. A data loss prevention strategy that will put in the guardrails around connectors and those connections to those different types of apps and services that we might use in Copilot and in Power Platform. Having good monitoring and insights to know when we need to take action, to understand what's across the landscape, and knowing which of those admin controls to turn. But what we don't have, and the things that we want to do in the future, and companies like AvePoint are building towards, is capturing that business data, the context of that agent. So why did you build it? Why is it important? Understanding the impact if should it not be available for some reason. Uh, tracking cost, having a mechanism to contain costs, mitigating risk in as much as possible, addressing sprawl management through governance automation, and when the tools mature and the governance processes are repeatable, then implement automation so we can work smart. And so there are really 4 pillars to Power Platform and Copilot Studio governance that we need to look at. And the foundation is built on those governance principles of environment, connector management, and activity monitoring. So even though agent governance controls today are not as mature as organizations would like them, there's good work to be done with traditional Power Platform management that we can do to facilitate success with Copilot Studio tomorrow. So environments, if you don't know, they're workspaces. They're like a SharePoint site, but they're usually built to be, or should be built anyway, to be purpose-driven for a particular business outcome or a department or a subject matter. So if we keep using SharePoint as an example, you probably wouldn't mix marketing with HR data. The overlap isn't appropriate. And we might have different access levels to that type of information that we would want to maintain. So we have to have content boundaries. And this is what we do with an environment. We have those environments for the subject matter, contain information, and billing and so on. DLP, or data loss prevention policies, they help to control the flow of data in and out of our agents, our apps and flows. And this is the front line in the defense for protecting our organization's data. DLP is about controlling how our connections to the different apps and services interact with the Power Platform. Now, these connections, they come in first-party apps, think like Outlook, SharePoint, Teams, to third-party apps like Salesforce, DocuSign, and Google. And so when we say setting the guardrails for agents, apps, and flows, we want those DLP policies to match the purpose of the environment that is intended also to fit the business outcome that we're trying to achieve. There's no one size fits all with DLP. You're going to have many policies for many different environments that serve many different types of outcomes. Monitoring the usage of our agents, our apps, and flows, they give us insights into what was created, what is active, maybe what has gone stale, and provide us with the insights to inform our actions for that go-forward governance. And finally, admin controls in the Power Platform Admin Center will allow us to affect product behavior, like allowing or preventing the transmission of data from our tenant into another tenant. Feature controls that maybe do things like limit Bing search or prevent data from crossing geographic boundaries. Microsoft is investing heavily in Copilot Studio agents, and it's something that's going to be important for all of us to stay on top of us, to understand what those new features will roll out through the Power Platform Admin Center Message Center and updates to the Copilot Hub. So that was a lot of high-level information about the good governance pillars for agents. But Tim, I'm going to pass it back over to you to close us out and get us prepared for the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all super critical. I know everybody wants to jump straight into the settings and straight into the tech and have a look at the all the dashboards and the different controls available to us, but it's super important to start with a plan, right? So if you can go to the next slide, Norm. So it's starting with that plan, understanding the governance fundamentals, what is it? What can we do with it? How do we make an inventory? What's the business goals? That's great. You absolutely need that plan to get started. The next step from here is actually implementing it. And that's what we'll be diving into on part 2 of this webinar, which is on Wednesday, July 17th. So you can sign up now, scan the QR code, or go to avpt.is/agents part 2, and that's case sensitive. So please use a capital A and a capital P there. But hit that link, sign up for part 2 of the webinar. We'll also send a reminder via email for those who attended this webinar as well, so you'll get that. All of that's ready to go, so we will definitely be talking about that. However, if you can't wait until July, if you have pressing questions right now about agent governance or rolling out Copilot within your organization, we're also happy to come and talk to you as well. So Jared, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So certainly we've got a couple of different offerings, and obviously a lot of times these agents are leveraging or accessing unstructured data in your M365 environment. So we put together a Copilot readiness assessment, which can work for if you're thinking about deploying Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? So kind of Gen AI as a service, or even if you're concerned around the current state of oversharing and sensitive information in your tenant, we can leverage our platform to scan, identify where you have highly sensitive data, help you understand where it might be overexposed, and come up with a plan for what remediation might look like. Again, it's very common. I think I probably spent about half my day just talking about how we get ready for Copilot and the agents. It's typically a 4 to 8 week activity based on the size of your tenant, based on the players on your side. But certainly, like, happy to dig into that as well. As a one-off, we can engage your AvePoint account leader to help support that conversation. But yeah, I mean, it's really funny as a former customer. I've been in that sort of data security space for what feels like a very long time now. A lot of the techniques that we are taking right now to address data security haven't changed. It's just the fact that Copilot and agents are this compelling event. To fund some of these and identify and address some of these issues that have been lingering for a while, right? I think you're getting a let's go clean up our tenant project greenlit doesn't really sound a lot of fun. Most CIOs are going, I don't know if I want to really invest in that. But if you tie it to, hey, we need to do this to enable AI, that tends to sort of remove some of those barriers. But yeah, happy to dig into any other questions about that. We've got a little bit of time for open Q&A. But yeah, I appreciate everyone making time. Want to break this up because obviously you can tell this is a very long conversation around how to help get your environments ready. So yeah, I think we'll monitor the chat for any lingering questions and make the content available afterwards. And thank you all for attending this.